Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to Fronteras, A Change in America. I'm Monica Ortiz Uribe. The subject of water remains a prominent issue across the Southwest as drought conditions persist, and water managers from California to Texas must figure out how to do more with less. Now, research is showing that an ancient irrigation system in northern New Mexico may be helping us retain more of what little water is available. Here to talk about that research is Sam Fernald. He's the director of the New Mexico Water Resources Research Institute here on campus. Welcome, Sam. How are you?
Thank you. Great.
So, first of all, I want you to describe these irrigation canals. Tell us how they work and a little bit about their history.
Absolutely. So it's a system, they're called acequias.
And this is a term, tell us where this term comes from.
Yeah, it actually is a Moorish term originally, taken to the Iberia Peninsula. And it actually describes a gravity flow system where water is diverted from a river, spread out over the floodplain, and then it waters crops, animals, homes, and then in our case sometimes goes back to the river.
And how are these? How were they made? These canals, these ditches?
Well, they were brought over 400 years ago from Spain to the New World, and they're basically hand-dug ditches, and they divert water through this gravity system. So they started as sort of handcrafted systems to move water across these floodplains.
I see, and they've remained in northern New Mexico all this time.
That's right, for hundreds of years.
Wow, wow. Well, and I understand now during the spring is when the locals gather to clean out these acequias, right?
This is true.
And it's an annual tradition, right? I think we have some photos of these acequias. These workers that we're looking at now, they're outside of Dixon, New Mexico. And tell me a little bit about what the workers are doing here.
So they're actually cleaning debris out of these ditches. The acequia needs to move water, so if there's debris that's accumulated over the winter time, they'll clean it out. It's a community project. One of the great things about these ditches is their community. They share, just like they share the water, they also share the cleaning of the ditches.
So how many workers would you get out here on a particular day?
It depends. There might be 200 people for a large ditch or 20 for a small. It depends.
And this is all, it's all pretty labor intensive, really. I just see they've got shovels and that's about it.
Yeah, that's the work they put in to get their water for the irrigation season.
And so what happens once it's cleaned out, then what happens with these acequias?
Well, as soon as it's clean, everybody's waiting for their water. They'll, especially this year, when we have a small snowpack, and we'll probably have a abbreviated runoff season in northern New Mexico, they'll actually want to irrigate as soon as they can. So they'll clean the ditches, and even now, those acequias have begun to run. And they divert water off the river or stream, and then it goes into these ditches and then into the fields.
So the main river that runs in this part of New Mexico, just like it is here, is the Rio Grande, right? And the Rio Grande up there, really, it looks nothing like the river that we know here in southern New Mexico, which can sometimes be a trickle. The upper Rio Grande in northern New Mexico actually looks like a river. It looks like this, actually. It has water running through it. And the water that's going into this river, where is it coming from?
Well, in the upper Rio Grande, there's actually 26 small sub-basins that contribute snowmelt runoff into the main stem of the Rio Grande. Actually, the Chama and the Rio Grande meet just south of Española, New Mexico. So it's coming from these smaller watersheds.
And then the water that's coming from those smaller watersheds, it's coming from snowmelt in the mountains.
Yes.
You're saying. So it's the Sangre de Cristo mountains that are up in northern New Mexico. And I mean, tell us what the situation is like. I mean, with the snow out there.
Well, there's not as much as we would hope for this year. snowpack is less than 50% of the median. So we have a situation where we are probably going to be short of runoff this coming irrigation season. And the neat thing about those watersheds at the outlet, the watershed's in the mountains, right? The snowpack sits up on the mountain, and at the outlet of most of these watersheds, it comes out of the mountains into a valley, and right in that valley is where the acequia is. So that plays into the part of the hydrologic story because it's a buffer between the mountains and then, of course, the lowland, like you talked about, as it goes farther south.
So this snow melt, it's coming off the mountains. It's coming earlier every year. And so this is a photo. We've got a photo here. This is up in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and we can see the stream of water coming down. It's early. This was taken in late March, and the snow is already melting and running off the mountain and coming down into the river system. And well, this leads us right into your research, correct?
It does.
So tell us about what is the research you're doing?
Well, there's two parts. One is just how do these acequias work hydrologically. The other is how do they play into ways that we can adapt to changing climate and changing runoff patterns. The temperatures are getting warmer, so as you alluded to, the actual snow melt comes earlier in the season. So when we need water most is later in the season, right? So there's a problem with that, and then
in like the summer, went down south here, right? The summertime, June, July is when. Okay.
Absolutely. So, first of all, we actually over 10 years ago started this research because people in these communities in northern New Mexico and actually southern Colorado and throughout New Mexico were touting the benefits of these acequias, but they didn't have a lot of data. So we set out to get the data.
Like what sort of benefits would they talk about?
Well, it supports riparian areas, the vegetation along the streams, the nice cottonwoods and everything. It supports having water in the river. It supports groundwater recharge, which we found out are all true, but now we have data to show that.
I see. And before, I mean, how did they even, without the data, how did they even know, and how did this information get passed around?
Well, this is, Los Ancianos, the older generation learned this by spending time on the land. They knew that when they turned the irrigation ditch, their well would come up. So this is actually part of the hydrology we studied. And we found that, sure enough, you put water into an acequia or onto a field, it seeps out of that and it recharges the groundwater. And every year the groundwater comes up. Every year it goes back down late in the season, but it's a recharge every year goes up and down with water that's seeped out of these acequia systems.
And how does it, so explain, how does it go from the ditch to the underground and then to the river?
Absolutely. So there's a compuerta or diversion off the river, and they put water into the acequia, and it gets spread out over smaller fields, and then it actually soaks into the field, right? So in our case, one of our large findings is from up to only 15% of the water might be used by the plants, and the rest 15.
Ah, so if you're growing, I don't know, an apple orchard or some other crop,
right?
You're finding that 15% will be used by
systems with a lot of water. It's more, but so there's actually misconception, I would say, that water that soaks into the ground or the water that soaks into the ditch itself is lost. So up to 50%, well, in some cases 50% of that may be water consumed by plants. In other cases it may only be 15. But what we found is that water that gets past the plant roots actually goes and recharges the groundwater.
So it's like you've got a natural sort of tank that's underground. That's where the water is going. Okay. And then once it reaches the underground, how does it get to the river?
So the great thing is in these systems, there's a groundwater system that's connected to the river. It's actually, if you take a well and you look at the water table, it's actually above the river. So when water goes it soaks below the plant roots, but it gets to the groundwater and it follows a return flow path underground back to the river.
So it's like almost an underground river.
Absolutely.
That reaches the actual river that you and I see on the surface. Okay. And how does this help us? How does this help us down south here in southern New Mexico?
So this is, as you mentioned in your opening, the water that sits underground in northern New Mexico, there's a couple reasons. Actually, it's underground, so it can't evaporate. It already got past the plant roots, so it's not going to get sucked up by plants, so it sits there. It takes a week to maybe 3 months to go back to the river underground. So all that time, it's sitting there. Then when it emerges into the river, it's actually cooler temperatures in northern New Mexico than southern, so you have less evaporation. So you actually reduce your evaporative losses. And the last thing is you put it back in the river when you need it most, sort of later in the season when people want to water crops and things like that.
Well, tell us about evaporation. Just how much water is evaporating once it comes out of the underground and into the river?
So if you get all the way down to Elephant Butte Reservoir, when it's full, it might be about 200,000 acre-feet of water. And that water, people have cited this fact, although our studies, we expect that within 3 to 5 years we will have the numbers to confirm this, but people have estimated that the total water used by the acequias of northern New Mexico approaches this same order of magnitude of 200,000 acre-feet that would evaporate from Elephant Butte Reservoir when it's full.
So that's how much water, you're saying, not how much water, the surface area of the reservoir, but the amount of water that's evaporating off of it. And why is it evaporating?
Just because it's solar radiation is turning that liquid into vapor and sending it to the atmosphere. Whereas if you're in northern New Mexico, the sun's not hitting the water because it's underground and it's not evaporating. So there's where some of your savings come in.
Yeah. So in the south, like the warm sun and the windy weather, the water is sitting there and that it just naturally evaporates.
Right.
So these acequias are helping prevent that, is what you're saying. Oh. And so this is what your research is telling you. And why is it important to know this and to show it in data?
So our contention will, of course, just to allow the people who are managing their water to have better data, is that these systems were brought over 400 years ago to New Mexico, and we contend that there's elements of sustainability that they're actually showing us because they've learned to manage with the variable precipitation that and there's been some significant droughts over the last 400 years, and these systems, they are able to adapt, and not only because of the groundwater recharge, but they are able to share water both in wet times and dry times. They share it sort of equally based on the community units. And even there's some adaptation based on irrigating closer to the river where there's water in dry years and being able to expand that when it's a wetter year. So there's this adaptability to these highly variable precipitation regimes we have here that these systems have captured and allowed it, and we think there's going to be clues for sustainability for the rest of us to learn from.
And so how do you take, what lessons do you take from this sort of a system? I mean, I don't imagine everyone should convert to dirt ditches and do it like they do in northern New Mexico, but what takeaway can there be?
Well, I'm a hydrologist, so I think my takeaway is learn where the flow goes, learn for these systems, both the individual communities, but also the river basins as a whole. If we can document these hydrologic flow paths, where water is being consumed, where it's being saved, that we can do a better job of managing it. So that's kind of my main take-home message. We have collaborators who are doing the more sociological, ecosystem and economic parts of this project, and they each have their own puzzle pieces, but we're learning that it really helps if you study these, and we're actually doing a simulation model where if you do these together, you can actually get a better understanding of the system than if you sort of have my myopic hydrology view. That actually loses some of the key features of these systems.
Well, tell me a little bit about the farms of northern New Mexico. I understand they differ greatly from farm operations in southern New Mexico.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of small farms. There are a lot of small acreage that it requires a special intensity of both crop selection and crop management to be able to have a profitable farm. We found that on the economic side, a lot of people supplement their farm income with other outside sources of income.
Like, so what do they do?
They'll work at a national lab, or they'll actually work in town at a business, and it has important implications for the acequia irrigation, because to keep these systems operational, it really helps to have a lot of the land farmed. So that's actually, it could be either a positive or a constraint, but that is an important part of these farms. A lot of people aren't making their whole living from the small farm, but it's important for their lifestyle and tradition.
Yeah. And so you said you've been doing this for about 10 years now, this research and collecting the data. Have you been able, have the farmers or the communities in northern New Mexico been able to do anything with the data?
So some of them, for sure, they actually told me they were planning to put a concrete lining in their ditch because they thought they were losing the water and wasting the water, and they were able to convince their local acequia commission. Typically each individual ditch will have a commission that operates it, and they convinced their acequia commission that they would like to not line the ditch, and then they actually get these other benefits. They support the vegetation. It actually improves water quality, which I didn't mention, because you dilute things like septic tank leachate with this clean water, and you improve water quality. There's even ecosystem functions with habitat, for example, even for fish and associated wildlife like birds that live basically supported by this water. So they've kind of actually, the benefits are as far away as Valencia, Spain. They're saying, oh wow, look at these studies that have been able to document all these benefits, and they're even pointing to these systems in New Mexico as illustrations of ways to continue these acequia systems.
I see. Do you know if the acequias exist in other parts of the United States or in other parts of the world?
So we actually just had a workshop in March where it was called Global Perspectives on acequias, and right here in Las Cruces at NMSU, we brought people in from Tunisia, Morocco, Spain, Portugal, Chile in South America, Mexico, southern Colorado, and around New Mexico. So yeah, these systems, mostly where you have snow melt runoff, but in general where you have mountain runoff that needs to be distributed, these local systems are used.
So in all of these places you just mentioned, they all came here to NMSU,
Yeah.
And were there any interesting discussions or discoveries that came out of this conference?
The neat thing, there's two kinds of connectivity that really seem to promote resilience of these systems, and then it actually turns around and they help promote sustainability, not of just water, but land use, and that's the hydrologic connectivity. So the systems where the groundwater and the surface water are connected are very healthy, and they're resilient to stresses. Also, the systems that are connected socially, where people have a close connection to the land and where they feel this sense of place, those can those can respond to stresses and survive.
Well, tell me a bit about how you've conducted the research. I know you have a team up in northern New Mexico. How do they go about doing the research and approaching the acequia owners and setting up their gear?
So mostly we work with the communities. We're really lucky to have a lot of communities who are like collaborating with us, and we have students, we have graduate students, undergraduates, we have technicians who get to learn who the community members are, and right now we're working in three main communities: El Rito, Rio Hondo Valley, and also Alcalde. And then you showed a slide of Dixon. We're helping with some measurements there. And these students will spend most of the irrigation season sort of getting to know the community, and then they actually, we have a lot of instrumentation that we try and keep going to get the electronic measurements, and then we keep in touch with the community for some of these other things.
Is it tough to go out into these communities and try to explain what you're doing and get them to allow you access to their ditches, which are almost, from what it sounds like, they're a sacred thing almost.
That I agree with that, and it's actually been great. We've had every once in a while there's a newcomer who kind of is not ready to have us traipsing through their land, but usually what we find is that people want this information. They really want to know, well, how does the water in the ditch affect the groundwater? What is the quality? What are the connections between, our local economy and this water system? So we've really, most of them say, hey, can you come measure our ditch too, or can't you include us in your study? That's almost the more prevalent approach.
Yeah. And are there challenges between working in the north and the south, or are there lessons that you've learned so far between the two, being in the two places?
Yeah. So of course the Mesilla Valley has a whole set of different questions, but if you just compare southern New Mexico with northern New Mexico, right now our river's not connected to the groundwater, so there's different implications there, because if water soaks beneath the field, it'll go to groundwater, but not go right back to the river.
So what happens? So this is here in southern
Right.
New Mexico. When the farmers here irrigate their crops, and the water goes underground, but you say that is not connected to the river. The underground water supply is not connected to the river like it is in the north.
Right, so this time, of course, it's critical underground water supply that people pump, so it's the same logic is true, that if that water goes past your plant roots or it soaks out of your ditch, that it may not be, it's not really lost. You turn it into a groundwater resource. The really extreme case of this is where we go to the Ogallala Aquifer and the High Plains Aquifer in eastern New Mexico, where it's fossil water that's sitting there. Most of it was recharged a long time ago, and it's not meaningfully getting recharged. It's not connected to a river, and there, the focus is really on. Well, you compare that to the acequias, and there in eastern New Mexico, really what you want to do is save your water and and not let it soak beneath your plants and irrigation system, because it's going to take a long time to get to where this aquifer is now, and by the time it gets there, there may not be much aquifer left. So we've learned that it really depends where you are for how you sort of make these connections between your management system and your hydrology.
Well, tell us, what do you have left? What is the next step? What is the next phase in your research, and what are you hoping to accomplish at a certain point?
Absolutely. So really we're trying to clarify the hydrology of these different areas around New Mexico. We actually have a water budget project that would look at what is the whole hydrology of the upper Rio Grande, and what's the net effect of all these acequia irrigated valleys? Or if you come to southern New Mexico, what's the net effect of the irrigation systems and surface groundwater connections? Or if you go to eastern New Mexico, or even up to the San Juan River Basin, and we're trying to put that all into one integrated picture of the hydrology that includes the different stakeholders, acequias and pueblos and irrigators, both on river-connected aquifers and fossil groundwater, so that you can look at it all in one sort of integrated picture.
And do you find people are paying more attention to water-related issues now, people that aren't hydrologists?
I think there's always been a lot of interest in these water issues, so it does seem to be heightened right now. We've actually had a lot of support from the legislator to confront these water issues, but I think.
Like what? Tell me what's going on in the legislature.
Yeah, they actually, the legislature, they have funded part of this water budget effort, and they're really interested in water scarcity, conservation, policy options for confronting drought, because we're in the middle of a big drought still. So the interest is definitely up, and it's great to see people turn they're interested in our research.
Are there any infrastructure or conservation projects here in the South that we can look forward to in the future?
There are a lot. I mean, I think there's actually a list of the different infrastructure projects. You can go to the web and see the different projects that are listed there. Of course, like the Water Resources Research Institute, we support more research than infrastructure, so our focus is providing better water information and how these systems work. So that's sort of where we're spending our effort.
And so, is this acequia research your main focus, or what are some of the other some other projects that you're doing there?
It's one of the big focus areas for sure. We're trying to move into what's our groundwater resource in the Mesilla Valley and in New Mexico, because we have a lot of brackish groundwater that's high in salt, but we can use it. There's big numbers out there, 20 billion acre feet that might be out there, and some of those estimates are based on numbers from the 1960s, so we're trying to improve those numbers. There's a lot of interest in desalination for water treatment and even crop selection here with the College of Ag at NMSU for low water use, so you can make your water go farther. And even lately, produced water. In parts of New Mexico, we're using perfectly good water for oil and gas production, and then when they're done with it, it's not high quality anymore. So we're thinking of ways to sort of make those operations more sustainable and use less of, basically keep our water for a longer sustainable future.
Yeah. So where could we is there where can we find out more about these studies if we want to know and research more on water in New Mexico?
Well, of course, you can do like you did and go to northern New Mexico, or go to the Water Research Institute webpage, or there's...
It's the Water Research Institute webpage where we can go, and that's on campus here.
It is here at
Very
NMSU. We actually serve the whole state of New Mexico, but we're based right here in Las Cruces at NMSU.
Very good. Well, San Fernald, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show today. It's been a pleasure. And thank you all for watching. This has been Fronteras, A Changing America. I'm Mónica Ortiz Uribe.